Hello, Mate to Thrive Nation. Today's all about food addiction. And for you who've been listening for the last 4 years, I am not an addict, but I do have an addiction to dark chocolate. And we've got the expert of experts, Dr. Joan Ifland, on the show, who has a PhD in addictive nutrition. She's written a book called The Author of Processed Food Addiction and has an MBA from Stanford Business School. So it's a privilege and an honor to have you on the show, Dr. Joan.
Thank you so much, Steve. I'm really excited to be here.
Brilliant. And I know this is round two just because of the bandwidth. So I really appreciate your time and I know how precious it is. But just really tell us the criteria about food addiction. You know, I think I've got a food addiction to dark chocolate and I do think about it after my meal. And I was 22 kgs heavier when I was at medical school, what's that, about 30 years ago. And so I did make a dramatic shift. But I think it's important that people that are listening saying, oh, I'm not addicted to any food. I'm not addicted to, possibly alcohol, any drinks or sodas. I know the young generation now are just addicted to this high fructose corn syrup and the amount of fructose and sugars they can get in such a quick time. But take us through the list again and really appreciate you repeating the list.
I hope this is really important, and I'm really grateful that you're getting this topic out there. Processed food addiction, there is evidence that it's quite common and it interferes with performance in many ways. And, I have a business background in addition to my addiction studies. I am quite interested in how processed food addiction is compromising companies, workplaces. And so as we go through these criteria, I'll be talking about how they might manifest particularly in a workplace. So the first one is unintended use, where you have a plan, you're going to eat clean, you're going to do better, and it doesn't work. You do well during the day, but you lose it at night. You have a plan that you're not going to eat anything bad, but by 10 o'clock, you're at the vending machine. And I will say that for managers of workplace, leaders in workplaces, the proximity to processed foods influences how much people eat. So I'm always surprised to go into a workplace and see processed foods piled up in the break room, or a vending machine's available, or it's available in the cafeteria. So unintended use, you can create an environment that will help prevent unintended use. And of course, the big statistic is nobody intends to gain weight anymore. I mean, it's rare. It's just on the very thin side, the abnormally thin side, people want to gain weight. So if you have employees who are gaining weight, of course they don't intend to. It's kind of an umbrella way to say that somebody is experiencing, they're in the grips of, they're no longer choosing. Choosing happens in the frontal lobe. They're being controlled by cravings back in the midbrain. Number two is failure to cut back. So the data here is that most people, upper 90% of people, if they do lose weight, will start to regain it within 3 years. That's failure to cut back. They want to, and they can't. Number three is time spent. So gradually over the years, and this all started when the tobacco companies bought Kraft, Nabisco, and General Foods between 1985 and 1988. 3 short years. All you have to do is ask yourself, why would people who make money from hiding addictive substances and destructive products like cigarettes, why would they move over to processed foods? And it's because high fructose corn syrup came on the market. It's a cheap, highly addictive sweetener. So when you think about this, we've been in the grips of this business model. It left the United States and it traveled around the world because the tobacco industry had relationships to distribute cigarettes, and they had the relationship for advertising. So boom, that's why obesity spread around the world in a very short 20 years. So time spent has been building. It builds slowly over the years, and it's been 40 years now. Gradually, you find that you have less and less time for the rest of your life. You're thinking about it all the time, time spent in your head. You're going to get it. You're making plans. You finish one meal and you start planning the next meal. It's you're throwing parties just so that you'll have a lot of processed foods in your house. It's insidious. Number 4 is cravings. You're thinking about food when you're not hungry. You're thinking about food when you shouldn't be hungry. You're thinking about it and it's crowding out other thoughts. And the evidence there is that cravings increase with BMI. So in the United States now, is this 83% of our country is overweight, obese, or severely obese. You know, people are being tortured by cravings, and it's ubiquitous, but it's also the food industry has tried and succeeded, I think, in normalizing this. So you mentioned thinking about chocolate right after a meal. That's not normal. That's a sign that you have some craving pathways, which are also the pleasure pathways, that are hyperactive, and they're being triggered by the end of a meal. The end of a meal is a trigger for thinking about it. Number 5 is failure to fulfill roles. And you might see this in a workplace. You might see people at a mid-afternoon dozing off, or mid-morning dozing off, or running a track to the vending machine or the break room. They're not able to focus on their work. They're not fulfilling their full potential as an employee. You see it in parents who are too big to get on the floor with their kids, but they're still eating. This is it. They know they're impaired. The sleepiness is so misinterpreted. People who don't eat processed foods don't have those crashes through the day. And I remember when I turned in my final doctoral documentation, the professor who reviewed it came back and said, well, everything looks great, except, of course, it's normal to be sleepy after a meal. No, it's not. No, it's not. The next criteria is relationship problems. You're craving so hard that you can't pay attention to another person. You're craving so hard that all you can think about is going off and eating something. Or your mood is very unstable. Now, this is something that workplaces really don't realize, is that processed foods artificially increase adrenaline. They wear out the feel-good pathways in the brain. They destabilize glucose, which has a huge impact on mood. And so you have employees who are chemically depressed, chemically anxious, chemically angry, chemically shamed, and it interferes with their ability to work. And of course, it can be entirely disruptive to a team or a department. People have no idea that those mood disorders are related to processed foods. Just like alcohol is destabilizing in terms of personality. The next one is activities given up. And we see this across the United States. It's just tragic. People aren't going to their bowling leagues. They're not going to their civic activities. They're going home. This often combines with screen addiction. So they just want to leave work and go home, or not leave their house at all. In the US, over 50% of people now live alone, and they're not going out, they're not participating in life anymore. They're too tired. This is another big thing people don't know, is processed foods make you very tired. They're drugs. The brain thinks they're drugs. So activities given up is very prevalent. Then you have hazardous use. You know, we think of hazardous use with alcohol, drunk driving, or operating machinery. But when you're leaving that fast food place and you've got 2 hands, pushing the food in your mouth, you're driving with your elbow, that's hazardous use. Severely overweight people have more accidents. Sometimes they can't see their feet and they're prone to tripping. Their balance is off because the weight is distributed. Their legs are are this way, so the weight-bearing joints are not able to actually bear the weight, and they're still eating. So all of these have a little caveat at the end, and they're still eating. They have these problems, and they're still eating. The next one is use in spite of knowledge of consequences. Here in the US, 93% of people over the age of 20 have a metabolic diagnosis. They have high triglycerides, blood glucose, blood pressure, or excessive fat tissue on their bodies, and they're still eating. Then you have tolerance or progression. You can see that across the whole United States. We have a research team that collects data on the use of processed foods. And it just goes up and up and up and up and up as a percentage of total calories consumed year after year. That's an entire population that's eating more and more. The feel-good pathways are wearing out, and so the person is driven to use more and more to stimulate the remaining receptors. And the last one is withdrawal. And for a lot of doctors, that's like if you don't have withdrawal, you don't have an addiction, which isn't true anymore. But we have really good data from the keto community. So keto adherents give up the sugar and flour. They're not eating refined carbohydrates, and they go through what they call keto flu. And it's a stomach ache, and it's a headache, and it's irritability, and it's depression, and it's fatigue. And it lasts typically about 4 days. And eating for reasons other than hunger is also an indication that somebody's eating to avoid withdrawal. And we have all kinds of people eat for emotional reasons. They eat because they're tired. They eat because they're depressed, or they're angry, or they're anxious. They're eating because they have a headache, or they have a stomach ache. Those are all withdrawal avoidance. So those are, now I do want to emphasize those are signs. This is not a DSM diagnosis yet. I've done a lot of work on these diagnostic criteria and the evidence for them. So this is one of the bits of evidence that we use that just lets people kind of leave the realm of disbelief and move right over to, oh my gosh, this is real.
No, and I think that's crucially important, and what a list. And if you've been listening and you've been plugging yourself in there, let's get Dr. Joan to give me an idea about my dark chocolate that I have almost every single night, and I look forward to. It doesn't tick all those boxes, but I would probably say my coffee in the morning, my double shot of a flat white, is something that I'll make time for, that I would compromise maybe on being on time or being a bit late, looking forward to it. So, if I'm having it 7 days a week, my dark chocolate, and I'm making sure I'm having it after a meal, I don't think it affects my relationships, or maybe I do get a bit sort of emotional or grumpy after a meal if I can't get that dark chocolate. But it seems like we need something to increase our dopamine. And from a neurotransmitter perspective, why don't you take us through what they do from serotonin to dopamine and these neurotransmitters, how the food industry has used their food scientists to tap into these neurotransmitters.
Yeah. So it's one of the reasons why processed food addiction is so difficult to treat. It's not, most people will meet 6 or more of those criteria. They will meet unintended use, failure to cut back, cravings, use in spite of consequences. They'll meet tolerance, and they'll meet withdrawal. So we've collected this data for years now. We have a self-quiz on our website, and those are the 6 criteria that people meet most often. And most people meet 6. So this is commonly now, the evidence suggests that this is commonly now a severe addiction.
Okay.
Then there are other factors that make it stubborn. And one of them is that these combinations of foods hyperactivate all four of the major addiction pathways. So dopamine and serotonin and opioid and cannabinoid. And when you have, even two substances being used, the addiction is harder to put into remission and keep in remission. Here you've got hundreds. They're really literally thousands. I mean, in the US, there are over 10,000 new processed food combinations introduced to the market every year. So what happens when those are stimulated? Now, remember, I mean, for me, one of the most helpful things was really take a close look at what happened when R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris bought Kraft, Nabisco, and General Foods in 1983, 85 to 88, 3 years. They brought an addiction business model. And I have published a paper on this business model. People think, why would a Stanford MBA be in the background of somebody who's working on food? It's because we're all here today talking about this topic because of a business model. And the goal of this particular business model is to take a worthless, destructive product, hide addictive substances in the product, and then advertise the heck out of it, put triggers all around the person, and make it very available, put it everywhere, and make it very affordable. It's the 5 A's. It's addictive product formulation, it's available, affordable, advertised, and the 5th A is then target market, the youngest possible user. The younger you start an addiction, the harder it is to put into remission. What is the goal of all of this? The goal of all of this is to keep these addictive neurotransmitters at such a high level in the brain that the blood flow is going back to the midbrain where these pathways are, and it's depriving the frontal lobe of blood supply so that the person cannot make a better decision. So there's a lot of value judgment. There's a lot of moral judgment around overeating. Oh, why don't they make a better decision? Well, it's because the decision-making brain cells in the frontal lobe are not getting blood supply. The addiction is controlling behavior because these pleasure neurotransmitters, they're able to travel directly across the midbrain to the behavior centers. There's no firing going on in the frontal lobe. The first time Nora Volkoff, who's the executive director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse here in the US, the first time she put obese people into a brain imaging equipment, she saw immediately those brains are doing the same thing as the cocaine and alcohol addicted brains. There's a lot of activity back in the midbrain, and the frontal lobe is dark.
Sure.
It is not firing.
Wow.
And she says this explains addictions. You have to drop 2 shoes. One, you have to have the intense desire, urge, longing. But to the second shoe is the braking system has to be off. You can have an urge, a longing, a desire, but as long as you have rational thought, you can stop it. But that is why the origins of the word addiction is to enslave. You don't have choice as a slave. You don't have choice in an addiction. And you've got to create an environment that protects. I mean, I'm really concerned about employees, but also children. In a home, you have to create an environment that protects us from this manipulative marketing. This is a marketing problem. And you just have to protect people from the triggers. So it's triggers. The thing about processed foods is once you've eaten something that is highly addictive, sugar is more addictive than cocaine. And then these combinations that hyperactivate all four of the pathways. Anything in the vicinity of where you have eaten it, the people, the place, the time of day, even the weather, the time of year, your brain now will use those as a trigger. It's called an associative cue. And if you eat something, on a park bench, pretty soon all park benches are making you think of that food. It's an associative cue. Pavlov demonstrated this. This is Pavlovian conditioning of these pleasure pathways. It's insidious, but that's what's going on in the brain.
Wow, that's amazing. And I want to get into the typical sort of neurotransmitters, what causes dopamine. And then I know you've mentioned this before in terms of opioids and serotonin. But I do want to say, is this something that, because we say this, we did a corporate keynote on nutrition, that it's not really people's fault, but it is their problem. They do have a problem. They need to overcome that problem. We will look at strategies later, but really the brain has almost been hijacked by, been hijacked. And then you don't have the frontal lobe or the frontal cortex bringing in the ability to bring the handbrake in there and contain it. Is this true? Because I think that's very important for people to understand.
Yes, so it is not your fault. The tobacco industry got 2/3 of American adults to smoke. And now, 84% of Americans are overweight or obese. It's a proven business model. The effectiveness of it has been clearly demonstrated. And it's, and then here in the US, the government is standing by and letting it happen. It's just incredibly profitable. And everybody thinks, we all love our doctors. My daughter's a doctor. She's an MD. And we love our doctors. And I think doctors are being set up because the training is that pharmaceuticals are the best way to treat this. And that's not consistent with an addiction recovery model. So here's a statement that will traumatize a food addicted person. This isn't your fault, but it is your responsibility. Why? That is something now I've been in this field for 28 and a half years. It's not true. It's not your responsibility. So let's go back to the tobacco model. How did people stop smoking? Well, there became fewer and fewer places where you could smoke. And so de facto, they were experiencing longer and longer periods of withdrawal. So it was easy for them to cut back. It was easy for them to, just not pay attention to cravings because they couldn't. They were in a meeting, or they were at their desk, or they had to do something, or they were in a restaurant. You're not allowed to smoke in restaurants. So they were in an airplane, gradually airports and even bars prohibited smoking. And they had to smoke at home. And then, secondhand smoke became known, and people in the home started to push back. They had to smoke outside. And gradually, because they were kind of in these forced periods of abstinence, that made it easier and easier to give it up. Okay. Why was that so important? Well, environment creates cravings. Environment creates cravings. So you're, just judging somebody, why don't they lose that weight? But your break room is packed with foods, things that we think of as foods. They're not foods. The brain thinks they're drugs. Your break room is packed. And a lot of departments have a food pusher. And the food pusher is getting satisfaction from baking sweets and bringing them in. So there's stuff in the break room, and the emails are flying around, and people are talking about it. This is common now. People they look like they're obsessed with food. They're doing that thing of thinking about it all the time and talking about it all the time. And then if you do try to bring clean food to lunch, you get ridiculed, because the last thing an addicted person wants is to lose their companionship. And they'll make fun of people who are bringing in clean food, or they'll say things like, they'll tempt them. Like, oh, you can have one bite. I made this just for you. I know it's your favorite. What's wrong with you? You're thin. Why don't you don't need to, the environment. So, and then the thing that is so important to really watch in a workplace is the messaging. So if you like, cigarettes are sexy, cigarettes are masculine, cigarettes are rebellious, cigarettes are feminists, you've come a long way, baby. That messaging that had to be suppressed. You can't have the manufacturers still telling you, oh, this is convenient and this is inexpensive and you don't have time to cook and healthy food is too expensive. All the deception, really deep deception. So you start with messaging. If you want to create an environment where your employees are not being triggered all the time, start telling them the truth. Processed foods cripple cell function in 8 ways, which is why, I mean, that's the fun of getting off of them, is that your mental and your physical and your emotional and your spiritual and your behaviors all just settle down and become controllable. So any messaging that a person is receiving about the desirable effect, the characteristics of processed foods, that's gaslighting. It's manipulative. It's not true. In the United States, in the year 2020, 1.7 million Americans died from diet-related diseases, 5 times the number of people who died from COVID. But what were the newspapers screaming about? COVID. Yeah. And you can see that they are influenced by, in the pocket of the pharmaceutical and the processed foods, their advertising revenues. So you have your messaging, and then it's the 3 M's. How do you create an environment in your workplace where people can recover? Messaging, number 1. Number 2 is menu. It's the 3 M's, messaging, menu, and I'm going to talk about modalities. It's menu. What foods are available in your workplace? And we know that availability triggers cravings. Do you get this trickle of dopamine that builds up and builds up and builds up? And finally, I call it the zombie walk. You're walking into the break room. Your midbrain has gotten control of your behavior. Your frontal lobe has now been just overridden. You might hear your frontal lobe saying, no, we don't want to do this. We don't want to do this. But your body is carrying you to the break room to get whatever's in there. That's cruel. For somebody who wants to stop eating, to make these highly addictive, sugar more addictive than cocaine, to make these substances available, easily, readily accessible, to maintain vending machines in a workplace, and then be running wellness programs that for some reason just don't work. That's not fair. That's not a fair fight. And then the last one, modalities. There are a lot of things like breath work, visualization, meditation, that the pharmaceutical industry keeps telling us. I mean, they have their own deceptive marketing that, oh, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. That's quackery. And that's not the evidence. All of those things work to increase anti-inflammation agents, anti-infection. They work to create a nice, stable dopamine, serotonin stream. And workplaces can teach these. You can teach breath work. There are lots of different kinds of breath work, and You can teach visualization, and it works incredibly well.
Mm.
So that's when you say person has to take responsibility. You know, imagine that somebody really wants, they've just decided they want desperately to quit drinking, but everywhere they go, people are drinking, and
That's-
everywhere they go, people are saying, well, you could have just one drink.
Mm.
The flooding of their brain with cravings would easily override the frontal lobe, and that's happening all the time.
So it's like a full immersion. You're really your environment. I think you said a statement, if it's in your home, it's in your mouth. I think you've got to understand that if you're going to have an environment that's going to allow, you would never have a cocaine person who's addicted to cocaine and then you have cocaine freely available just 10 steps away. That would be cruel. And I think probably that's what you're saying about the work environment. But okay,
Yes.
environment's important and corporate responsibility is important, not making it so easily available. Obviously, going to maybe there's a market. I don't know if it was new grocery stores in terms of real foods instead of processed foods, but let's possibly ask the definition from you what a processed food is, because I even look at nuts, and we've got a store called Woolworths, and then you go and have some macadamia nuts, or you go and look at pecan nuts or almond nuts, but then they've got sunflower oil, then they've got salt, they've been salted. What defines, a process or ultra processed? Is it processed? Is it ultra processed? Because I mean, that's important. And then possibly have just quick, I know we've sort of gone over it, but what releases dopamine in the ultra processed foods? What releases the cannabinoid system? What releases the serotonin? What releases those neurotransmitters? Because then people can look at a package, like I had the corporates look at the package, the executive team, and saying, look at what's in these products that you deem as healthy, and they seem to be ultra processed.
Okay. So ultra processed is not a word that is useful in defining addictive substances. It's got huge gaps, and it's never designed to be used with addiction. It assumes that addictive products that you make at home are okay, and which is kind of like saying if you make your meth at home, it's okay. No, it's not. It's no less dangerous and destructive. I mean, you don't get the dairy piece of it at all. Dairy is in the category of normal foods. So I think it's easy for the press to grab onto, oh, it's ultra processed foods. It's an easier sell. You're not going to upset your readership quite so bad, because an addicted person will say, oh, it's only the ultra processed foods. Okay, well, I'll make it at home. And it's another trauma. Everybody else just gave up the ultra processed foods and they're okay, but I'm still binging, I'm still craving, I still have all these 11 signs, and I'm making the stuff at home just like they told me to. But why doesn't it work for me? What's wrong with me? Oh, I remember now. I am a failure. This is destroying personalities. When you give somebody a tip or a suggestion or just follow this rule, this is now, it's so severe that you really, the recovery concept is you've got to give them an environment where they can safely rewire every cell in their brain. I grew up in an addicted brain. You know, my parents ate processed foods, so all the processed food addiction genes were turned on at the moment of my conception. My mother ate processed foods during pregnancy. So all my learning, which takes place in utero about what to eat, all the development of my food preferences, which fetuses develop by sampling amniotic fluid, they were all geared towards processed foods. I was born and then given 52% of formula, sugar, and corn syrup solids. And it never let up. So I grew up in an addicted brain. Every cell in my brain developed in an addicted brain. I've got to be in a very gentle environment where I can easily access rewiring techniques. And that's actually our programs, our online programs are designed specifically to deliver that, what I just said, an environment that you can access all day long, 24 hours a day, around the clock, around the world, where you will be met with somebody who's kind and trained and can listen and sympathize and affirm. You're okay. You're okay. You're okay. Okay, so let's do the chemistry, the neurochemistry. When I say all 4 of the craving pathways are affected, you can see the manufacturers stepping up to that. So when we were talking about chocolate, here in the US, there was a craze for, well, chocolate that had bacon in it. It's just like, I'm going to swing back around to that after I talk about the different substances. The bottom line is they're trying to get more different substances into one single product to hyperactivate more of the different pathways. It's just diabolical. So sugar activates dopamine the way alcohol activates dopamine, and the research on this is stunning. We have research, like a researcher took rats and injected their noses with sugar and cocaine and watched the dopamine response. Sugar created a dopamine response faster and greater than cocaine. Sugar created a greater, faster response than cocaine in the dopamine pathway. We have other research from the University of Bordeaux. If you addict rats to heroin and cocaine and sugar and saccharin, and then you put them in a cage where they can choose, they'll choose the sugar. Rats will choose sugar over cocaine and heroin.
Wow.
If you take the sugar away, oh, well, it's got calories. Maybe they're choosing it for the calories. They'll choose the saccharin next. So these are not just addictive substances, but they're highly addictive. High fructose corn syrup has been shown to go through the body like corn alcohol. This is Robert Lustig's work, and he's published this incredible article just demonstrating that. So you have dopamine there, and then you have gluteomorphine in gluten. It's just, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, this is research that's been replicated around the world, which is you can extract morphine from gluten, and it has been shown to attach to the opioid pathways, an opioid receptor.
Wow.
Same thing with the casomorphine in dairy. Casomorphine. We have great research showing that if you put the beta casomorphine extractions in a petri dish with opioid receptors, that the beta casomorphine will attach to the opioid receptors. And while we're on the opioid receptors, we have salt, excessive salt. We must eat salt. You've got to eat salt for your electrolytes. But if you eat excessive salt, like the amount, and this is so diabolical, the tobacco companies, as soon as they got a hold of Lunchables, these are children's meals. They're given to children typically. They put the salt content way up to train those children's brains to crave salt. So that's also in the opioid pathway. We see a withdrawal syndrome in the opioid pathway. Mark Gold at the University of Florida had a morphine withdrawal clinic. And he was onto this because he'd see the morphine addicted people in withdrawal. They'd take the tops off the salt shakers and just pour the salt on their food. So they were using that to transfer the addiction and mitigate withdrawal. Then flour has been shown, highly refined carbohydrates have been shown to be addictive. And then you get over to fats, fascinating new research on addiction to excessive fat, not normal fat. Normal fat is encasing your brain and insulating your nervous system and forming the membrane of every cell in your body. So you do well to eat fat, but excessive fat. And why has this become such an issue? And I've heard this from, high-level education platforms, speakers saying, oh, you can eat as much fat as you want. It's so satiating. Not to an addicted person, not to somebody who's sugar addicted and craving terribly. People get on a ketogenic or a carnivore food plan, or they get on any clean food plan. They give up the sugar, they give up the flour. It could be a Mediterranean food plan, it could be a paleo, it could even be whole food plant-based. And they're so excited because the sugar cravings stop. But if you've been told, like you're keto or you're carnivore, that you can eat as much fat as you want, you will transfer the addiction. Because fat has now, in a lot of different ways, been shown to hyperactivate the cannabinoid system, named after cannabis. And people will, and the sugar cravings don't go away, they incubate. This is work that's done right here in the state of Washington. Jeffrey Graham at Western Washington State University. He's shown this. He's shown it for cocaine, and then he's shown it for sugar, that over a 6-month period, the sugar cravings will come back. And then, of course, you're in this environment where people are pushing all the time. You go to a wedding. Oh, well, I'm doing so good. I've lost all the weight. I feel great. I'll just have one piece of cake. Boom! It's an explosion in the brain, and they can't get back. Now they have a lethal. This is just so, it'll make people sick. They have sugar addiction and fat addiction, and they're eating it in combinations. The other thing that really promotes this are the keto processed foods. And this is, I don't even have a word for this. It's keto candy. Oh, it's all fat with just a little sweetener in it, artificial sweetener. And that is unbelievably addictive. And you will develop fat addiction eating that stuff. It's diabolical.
Wow. Okay, that is something to really think about. It's fascinating just to have a look at how these neurotransmitters have been really considered incorporated foods by big food.
I forgot caffeine and food additives. So those are other dopamine triggers.
Good. All right, so we've got this now. You've said the strategy of immersion, and I think, just the environment being crucial. Are there any other tools or tips or hacks that you can speak to into this someone who's struggling with food addiction? Because it just seems like most people are, I think about myself, it's dark chocolate and it's probably caffeine in the morning, although
Yes.
But I think we need some more sort of tools or biohacks that can really help people. And I suppose you need to tap into the dopamine, serotonin, opioid and endocannabinoid system in another way to try and help you replace rather than try and stop. But that doesn't seem as easy as it rolls off the lips.
No, you have to just be realistic. This is because it starts, and that's another indication of severity. Why am I talking about severity so much? Because severity drives the treatment match. Severity drives the determination of what is the right level of care, what is the right level of support. And this is an addiction that never lets up. So the earlier an addiction sets in, the more difficult it is to put into remission. And we have the constant triggering. these processed food industries, there's no regulation. It's not like cigarettes where you have to be a certain age, or alcohol where you have to go to a certain place to buy it. This is everywhere all the time. And as I said, it's a lot of different substances. So all four of the pathways are hyperactivated. So the right level of support for somebody with a severe addiction is residential for 2 years. But we're not sending millions of people to residential treatment for 2 years. And I've just been doing a lot of reading and eating disorder treatment, and they don't get the substance piece of it at all. Like, I just read last night a really lengthy article written by researchers that was a team all over the world. And it's new approaches to putting eating disorders into remission. They don't mention food at all, not once. Not one of the approaches are to connect this out of control eating with specific substances. So you can't find residential treatment, because if you go to a residential treatment center, they will tell you that learning how to eat processed foods, they're there to teach you how to use processed foods, which cripples cell function in 8 ways. It's the most puzzling, befuddling thing I've come across in all these years. Okay, so once I saw this, I really learned this reading the research for the textbook. I thought, okay, we'll offer immersion recovery online. And then Zoom came along. I just, in desperation, when I saw that this is typically severe, I started a daily phone call. It was not enough, not by any stretch of the imagination. And then Zoom came along. And I said, oh, we could do this over Zoom. And I took people from the phone call. The phone call didn't work. They were loyal anyway. So I took 10 volunteers from the phone call. And I said, okay, we're going to be on Zoom all day long. I didn't have enough experience to know that I can't be on Zoom all day long, but we're going to be on Zoom all day long. And we're going to support each other. I was like, so we did. They got Zoom on their laptops or their phones or whatever. They walked around with it in their houses all day long. These are people who were losing control every day. And they'd been losing control every day for 20 years. And at the end of that day, I went around the room, about 10 people, and I said, well, so how was your food today? I had a clean day. I had a clean day. I had a clean day. I had a clean day too. All 10 of them had a clean day. Now, mind you, at this point, I had spent the prior 22 years trying this, that, and the other thing, every program I could think of, none of which worked. Except one. It was my doctoral internship, which I did in a small faith organization. They got it. They followed the food plan. They got all the results. And I missed the significance of that. So I ran for the research that day. I mean, like, my jaw was on the floor. Finally, after 22 years, we have an answer. Oh my gosh, something that works. And I found mirror neurons. Mirror neurons, mirror neurons, mirror neurons. So we know that the addiction will override the frontal lobe, and that's what an addiction is. You've become a slave to those craving pathways. However, there's a system in the brain that is stronger than the addiction, and it is mirror neurons. So how do mirror neurons work? Why do we have them? So mirror neurons are a very special brain cell that watches, listens, observes to what other people are doing. And that mirror neuron actually reaches over to the surrounding brain cells and encodes, programs, instructs. It puts instructions in those surrounding brain cells to do what the people around us are doing. Now, this is the highest level survival mechanism. It is because humans are pretty small. And for all the 7 million years of human evolution, you had to be around other humans to fight off predators. A hyena, a lion, a tiger, any of those predatory animals could take down a human, a lone human, easily. You had no chance. In a group, you could fight off almost anything. Your group also found you food, water, shelter, protected you from elements, protected your children, and your survival depended on fitting in and doing what the group was doing. So if they were going to look for food, you went with them. They were going to look for water, you went with them. They were, looking for a cave for the night or climbing up into a tree, you did that too. It will override anything. It will take you to death. I mean, ironically, it's if everybody else is sick, then you're going to be like, oh, well, we should be sick too. We should be on some meds. So that's what happened that day.
Sure.
Is everybody, all those mirror neurons were looking around. Oh, everybody's eating clean. Everybody's eating clean. Okay, well, we'll eat clean too. And the encoding of the brain cells was switched just profoundly. They all got through withdrawal that week. And the next week I had a paid group coming in. I'd advertise for them. Same thing. Same thing. So this is what you as a workplace manager can create. So you don't have to, I mean, we're worldwide. When we started advertising this, people signed up from all over the world. Now we've got trained teams all over the world. This is 24 hours a day. People wake up in the middle of the night with that binging urge. They can flip open their screen. When you walk into community, when you connect with community, you get an oxytocin release. Oxytocin travels to the craving pathways and regulates them, dopamine. So we now have a super easy way to turn off cravings. Just flip open your screen, just connect with your community, and you'll get that oxytocin release. And it's just incredible. So my big idea, my big pitch, and I'm leaning back on that Stanford MBA. I've worked in those workplaces. But when I got out of business school in 1978, there was not processed foods in the break room. This is part of the addiction business model, penetrating workplaces to have all that crap piled up in the break rooms, and your faith organization, and your volunteer organization, and your school, and your kids' school. It's everywhere now. That's part of the addiction business model. Make it available, trigger those cravings. So this is the incredibly great news, is that employers don't have to fight with employees. They don't have to, get in the trenches about their food. They don't even have to educate them about their food. They don't have to like, oh, well, this has vitamin A, or this is, none of that, none of that. They can offer education. And that's our deal. I've got 100 videos in my library. I keep making them. I keep discovering new things. Yeah. I'm working on a video right now for why eating disorder treatment doesn't work. And so if you can create common understanding among your employees, start with whoever's most interested. And now you have what we know to be role models. Well, every time a mirror neuron lands on that role model, that the mirror neurons are like, oh, this person doesn't eat processed foods, well, maybe we shouldn't eat either. And it will spread so naturally and so gently and so kindly. And then, and then we talked about availability. Don't take things away right away, but, ask smaller groups of people if they would like to, ask the food pusher to at least, put it inside a cabinet in the break room and not send the email around. Gradually, respectfully, over a couple of years. So take a couple of years, educate employees about the truth about processed foods. and then just really respectfully develop consensus about what foods you want to have in your workplace, and then teach them breath work, and teach them meditation, and teach them visualization. And I think you will just see a completely different employee force, workforce, productive, clear-headed. Processed foods are inflammatory, and people have brain fog because their brains are literally inflamed. And then they have cravings, and they can't focus on their work. The other thing about having this hyperactive craving system in the midbrain and pulling blood supply away from the frontal lobe is all of those frontal lobe functions are compromised. Paying attention, learning, making decisions, solving problems, impulse control, memory. They're all compromised. And you see this. These are all epidemics now. Americans are eating 73% of their food in processed foods.
Sure.
So all of the epidemics that you would expect to see are there. Anyway, I want to give employers hope that they can create and it's gentle. So employers, I don't want to be talking to my employees about their food. Oh, no, I'm not invading there. Nope, you absolutely are not. But you're offering topics such as, we just went through, are you experiencing the signs? And I think we will reword it for workplaces. Instead of calling it food addiction, let's call it processed food cravings. And we'll call it processed food recovery, not processed food addiction recovery, so that employees don't feel defensive. And there's so much judgment in that word addiction. So this is just a process of, hey, are you interested in knowing if you have processed food cravings disorder, or we'll call it something gentle? Or did you know that, would you be interested in learning about how processed foods cripple cell function? Would you be interested in learning about why nothing else has worked? So you gradually create common understanding, common knowledge. I mean, it's so dependent on deceptive advertising. People stop smoking when the Surgeon General in the US said smoking causes cancer, smoking causes cancer. You couldn't go anywhere without hearing smoking causes cancer. So that kind of just common understanding of what is actually going on out there, and then making clean food available. And then, as I said, teaching these modalities. Did you know that breath work will increase your anti-inflammation agents in your bloodstream? Would you like to try it? It's easy, and it's shockingly effective.
Yeah, Dr. Joan, what a summary. If we just look at it, environment, and then these groups and these mirror neurons to help you. And obviously you've got trained group facilitators. That's important, coming together in a group sort of setting. I don't know if you meet once a week or how it works, but you've obviously got your program, and we'll put the links to the show notes, in the show notes, to your website and the programs that you offer and the community that people can join. Maybe you just want to share just quickly, people listening, where they can find you.
So Food Addiction Reset is where you can find the self-quiz. If you're interested in getting help with your workplace, you can email me, Joan Ifland, JOANI, F as in France, LAND, at Remission Optimistic.
Okay.
You're going to be shocked at how many diseases can go into remission.
Yeah.
I mean, you're a doctor. I really hesitate to say this, but once you get cell function restored, it's a pretty surprising range of mental, emotional, physical, behavioral disorders, just with a lot of support, a lot of gentleness, a lot of, cognitive behavioral therapy. And you've got to teach the brain to think in a new, positive, supportive way. But it's so much fun. It's so much fun to take somebody who has been told you're going to be in pain for the rest of your life. This is a chronic disease. and give them an environment in which it can fade away. And then, of course, everything that your employees are learning, they're taking home to their families. People are just distraught at their children's behaviors, their loved ones being sick, expensive treatment. I know you all have social medicine there, but it's really sad and it's upsetting, especially if you lose somebody too young.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Well, I want to declare favor and blessing over you, Dr. Joan Ifland, your courage, your calling, your programs. Really want to try and get this out as far and wide as we can, working with a lot of corporates and improving cognitive performance. These food cravings and these addictions, I think, are really affecting people's ability to
Terrible.
deal with distress and to be able to perform from a cognitive perspective. And so their nutrition, but also why they are not able to deal with these food addictions and the lack of success with so many programs out there is so important. And people do feel judged, they do feel as failure, just again and again. And so there is hope with Dr. Joan Ifland. And we believe in health coaches, we believe in group work as well. Being really, really important, getting people around you, which is crucially important. So thank you so much for your time, your expertise, and hopefully we can chat again in the future.
Oh, anytime. This is a huge syndrome. It affects every cell in the human body. It's inadvertently, supported by public policy, et cetera, et cetera. We could talk about this forever.
Forever.